The first words hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. "Lauren, you really are a disappointment." My stomach twisted as every eye in the room suddenly felt like a spotlight, zeroing in on me. It was my brother's engagement dinner, one of those grand, over-the-top family events where appearances mattered more than truth. And there I was, sitting 2 chairs away from the center of attention, invisible, as if I were just a shadow flitting around the edges of their perfect world. Then the fiancée leaned in toward my brother, her lips barely moving. "Wait, you're they." She didn't finish the sentence, and that unfinished thought stabbed straight into the curiosity that was already swelling in the room. Every head snapped toward me. Every whisper lingered like smoke, making my own pulse deafening. If your family ever underestimated you, you know that sharp, sinking feeling when you realize the truth. "You don't matter here." Before I could even process what was happening, my phone buzzed. A quick glance down reminded me to breathe. I needed to document this to survive it. Tap like, comment where you're listening from. Everyone deserves to witness this. Everyone deserves to see what happens when silence suddenly flips the script. And trust me, that silence, so suffocating, so damning, it changed everything. I'm Lauren Hayes. The middle child, the overlooked one, the name that never carried weight at family events like this. In a house that prized titles, predictability, and profitability above all else, I was always the background noise, the invisible person at the table. My brother, the golden child, radiated charisma and success that made everyone lean in and laugh just a little harder. And me. I was just the shadow, the filler between silverware and polite conversation, the person no one asked about because my existence somehow didn't matter to them. Even my mother, she always thought she was helping, jumped in before I could even answer. "Lauren will," she started, and my words died in my throat, swallowed by the performative warmth of a room that cared more about appearances than my voice. The private dining room downtown was a shrine to pretension. Dark wood walls glimmered softly under the low lighting, meant to project sophistication and success. White tablecloths stretched across the tables, heavy silverware meticulously arranged as if it could somehow weigh out our worth. Professional servers glided silently, their movements rehearsed, eyes downcast, reminding me that in this world, performance mattered more than authenticity. I looked around, noting the hierarchy without even thinking. My brother sat at the center, commanding attention like a small king, while guests leaned toward him, laughter always a little louder when directed his way. My parents sat on either side of him, a mix of relief and pride plastered on their faces, silently congratulating themselves for raising someone worthy of admiration. And there I sat, 2 chairs away, excluded from every glance, every joke, every acknowledgement of significance. No one asked about my achievements. No one checked if I was okay. My own mother's words spoke for me before I had the chance. The room was exquisite, but it was suffocating. The success it projected was empty. And in that moment, I realized I had a choice. Stay invisible or finally make them see me. The meal continued, and with every clink of silverware, I felt more like a ghost than a guest. My mother leaned slightly forward, her smile warm but brittle, and said, "Lauren's still figuring things out." Her words weren't cruel, not exactly, but the dismissal cut deeper than any shouted insult ever could. It was the subtle erasure, the quiet way a family makes you feel like you don't belong, wrapped in politeness. My father chimed in from across the table, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Real pressure is something you'll understand when you step into the real world." His voice was light, teasing even, but it carried the weight of judgment. Around us, everyone laughed politely, mistaking his sarcasm for generosity. It was a performance. Their smiles were shields, and I felt small standing behind mine. I looked down at the table, trying to anchor myself in something real. The faint flicker of the candle reflected off the polished silverware. The rich, savory scent of steak made my mouth water, even though my appetite had died somewhere between my brother's anecdote and my mother's kind explanation. I listened to the conversations, the rapid-fire exchanges, the jokes that were funny only because everyone already agreed they should be. I became a student of their rhythms, studying every beat, every laugh, every pause. Staying still, I realized, made people forget I was there. And in that invisibility, I found a kind of quiet survival. I noticed her, the fiancée. Unlike the others, she didn't dominate the conversation. She didn't try to insert herself into the banter or laugh louder than everyone else. She simply watched, eyes sharp, lips pressed in a neutral line. When she asked a question, it was deliberate, measured, making my brother slow down just a fraction before he answered. Her attention wasn't on what he said, it was on how he said it. On the unspoken patterns, the unacknowledged tensions. I caught the subtle way her gaze lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than necessary. And in that moment, I realized she saw something. Someone was seeing through the facade. I remember the networking night like it was yesterday. The event had been at our parents' house, a sprawling, meticulously decorated playground for influence. Drinks glimmered in crystal glasses on the patio, the pool reflecting the warm lights strung overhead. Men in tailored jackets laughed at their own cleverness. Women nodded with practiced charm. And me. I wasn't invited. When I asked why, my mother's voice was smooth, almost gentle. Lauren's very technical. We didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. Gaslighting wrapped in kindness. Exclusion dressed as concern. Stung, of course. But the worst part wasn't the absence. It was the way everyone nodded along, accepting it as normal. No one paused to question it. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I'd never been the golden child, that my worth didn't need validation. But it wasn't fine. Then there was the holiday barbecue. The sun beat down mercilessly, the smell of charcoal thick in the air, paper plates sweating condensation onto white tablecloths. My father's voice carried above the music, full of pride as he bragged about my brother's accomplishments. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned me. Not with pride, not with warmth, but with amusement. My stomach twisted. Guests offered awkward smiles, unsure whether to join in laughter or sympathy. And when my father placed a patronizing hand on my arm, the kind of touch that says, "Don't worry, you didn't really lose anything," I felt the humiliation settle deep into my bones. Public embarrassment, everyone nodding politely, pretending it didn't sting. It was a familiar pattern. Back at the engagement dinner, my brother leaned slightly back in his chair, eyes scanning the room. Then, as if rehearsed, he said, "Not everyone takes the traditional route." The words were casual, even playful, but the glance he gave me was deliberate. My chest tightened, pressure building behind my ribs, an urge to speak clawing its way to the surface. But I didn't. Because in this family, words were weapons, and silence could be armored. I chose stillness. I let the moment pass, letting them believe they still held the power. But inside, a quiet realization emerged. Silence at least belonged to me. Even when my presence was ignored, even when my voice was stolen, even when the world tried to erase me, I still had that. And sometimes that was enough to reclaim agency. Sometimes the quiet, invisible ones are the ones who see the entire board, the ones who remember every slight, every dismissal, every laugh at their expense. And one day, we remember in ways they can't ignore. The first jab came hours before the engagement dinner even began. My brother's voice, casually cordial over the phone, carried a sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Hey, I can help you pick something appropriate to wear," he said, as if I were a child fumbling with my own wardrobe. "I just don't want you to feel embarrassed." Embarrassed. The word echoed through my chest. The implication was unmistakable. I was the problem, a walking inconvenience needing management. Contempt dressed as concern. I could almost hear the applause in my head, the silent nods of approval from a family already convinced of my inadequacy. Rage simmered beneath my ribs, sharp and hot, yet I let it stay there, carefully caged. Then came my mother's touch, a hand on my shoulder, light but possessive, as if weighing the invisible baggage of my future. "Lauren's. Well, we're just trying to plan for her stability," she said, her voice syrupy with what she probably believed was generosity. "Someone might take care of her one day." I smiled politely, nodding while inside a different storm was brewing. Their narrative cast me as a burden, a charity case to be managed, someone who would never command respect on my own terms. Every word was a subtle reminder that I was a problem they had to solve, a task to be overseen, and yet, in that controlled storm, a quiet clarity began to crystallize. I focused on my heartbeat, counting its steady rhythm as if measuring my own resilience. Nights working alone. Calls I couldn't share. Decisions made independently in silence, away from anyone's gaze. They thought my quiet was uncertainty. They thought patience equaled dependence. But I knew better. I had learned to observe, to catalogue, to hold power in restraint. And I noticed the fiancée, the sharp observer who had stopped smiling along with the rest of them. She had stopped engaging in the ritual chatter. Her attention now intentional, deliberate. Her gaze followed my posture, my micro-expressions, the subtle hints I left in the corners of my gestures. She was starting to see what they hadn't, that I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't waiting. I was building. Because the truth, my truth, was starkly different from what they imagined. My life wasn't uncertain, it was methodical. Early mornings bled into late nights. A quiet apartment humming with the low drone of my laptop. Calls across time zones punctuated the silence. Progress wasn't measured in applause or congratulations. It was in signed documents, cleared payments, messages confirming. We're moving forward. No one celebrated. No one noticed. And that was exactly how it had to be. Momentum, growth, accomplishment, it thrived in privacy. The world didn't need to witness it, and certainly, my family didn't need to validate it. That's why I stayed silent. I couldn't talk about my work. Everything I had built relied on careful discretion. Agreements were fragile. One careless word could unravel months of preparation. A delicate network of trust undone by a single misplaced explanation. When my family offered help, I smiled and politely declined. Letting them underestimate me was safer, smarter, more strategic than correcting them. Invisibility wasn't weakness. It was survival. And I was learning slowly but deliberately how to turn it into power. Of course, they misread everything. The rented apartment they saw as failure was discipline. Simple clothes weren't surrender. They were focus, a way to avoid distractions that could derail progress. They were comfortable, certain. My brother leaned back in smug satisfaction. My father waved for another round of drinks. My mother, still plotting future holidays, assumed she understood my trajectory. But the fiancée was different. Her gaze had returned to me, not dismissive, not polite, but thoughtful, probing, focused. She noticed my pauses, the moments of deliberate silence. She recognized that look, the one people get on calls when they realize they've made the wrong assumptions, underestimated the wrong person. And in that glance, I saw an acknowledgement that went deeper than any verbal praise. She wasn't just seeing me. She was seeing everything I had built in the quiet, the calculated effort that made me far more formidable than they could ever imagine. In that instant, I realized the power dynamic had quietly shifted. The room might still be theirs, full of laughter and polite applause, but I held a different kind of control. The one they couldn't name, the one they didn't anticipate, the one that gave me space to decide when, and how, to step fully into the light. The server returned with a practiced smile, arms balanced with crystal glasses, completely unaware that the air in the room had changed. Plates had been cleared, defenses were down, and comfort had settled in. That dangerous kind of comfort people have right before they say exactly what they mean. My father stood, tapping his glass gently. To family, he began, his voice steady and proud. And to new beginnings. Chairs shifted. Smiles appeared on cue. Glasses lifted, that I raised mine a beat behind everyone else, just enough to stay unnoticed. A survival tactic I'd perfected over years. Move slower. Draw less attention. Let moments pass over you like whether my brother took the opening immediately, launching into a story about the house he and his fiancée were looking at. Bigger yard. Better neighborhood. Base to grow. The words future and next phase floated easily from his mouth, polished and rehearsed. My parents interrupted constantly, not to stop him but to improve him, correcting details, adding context, making sure every sentence landed exactly right. Then my father turned his glass slightly toward me. And Lauren, he said, pausing just long enough to make sure everyone was listening, well, she's always been independent. The pause before independent was deliberate. Why mother laughed softly. She likes doing things her own way, she added, like it was a stubborn habit I'd never outgrown. We just want her to be secure. You know how hard the world is. Concern, pity, politeness, all wrapped together so neatly that no one could accuse them of cruelty. Only care. That's when the fiancé spoke, not loudly, not casually, not as filler. Lauren, she said, looking directly at me, what exactly do you do? The question landed differently. It didn't float. It didn't skim the surface. It dropped straight through the tablecloth, straight through the performance, straight into the space no one ever asked me to occupy. What exactly do you do? Not are you still figuring things out? Not is it working yet? Not do you need help? Just the question. Why? Brother laughed before I could even breathe. It's complicated, he said, waving a hand. Some tech thing. She's been experimenting. My father nodded quickly, relieved to take over. Lots of people try those kinds of things. It's a tough space. Their voices overlapped mine before I ever spoke. Heat climbed up my neck, that familiar pressure behind my eyes, the instinct to disappear kicking in hard. I kept my mouth closed. Silence had always been safer than correction, but she didn't smile. What kind of platform? She asked. The table went quiet in a way it never did. This wasn't polite silence. This was unfamiliar silence, the kind that happens when the usual script stops working. Chairs creaked. My brother cleared his throat. My parents shifted, suddenly unsure, and my mother leaned in, her tone gentle but firm. Lauren's modest. She doesn't like to talk about it. It wasn't true. But it sounded convincing. The fiancée tilted her head slightly, leaning forward just enough to signal intent. Her voice dropped, calm and focused. I'm asking her. She looked at me again. Is it logistics related? For the first time all night I spoke. Yes. One word. Steady. Her eyebrows lifted. Barely perceptible but unmistakable. Global. I nodded. My brother laughed too loudly. See. This is what I mean. Very vague. She didn't even glance at him. Supply chain optimization? She asked, eyes sharpening. Something in my chest loosened. My pulse slowed. Yes. The air shifted again, but this time everyone felt it. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was recognition. Silence thickened. The fiancée exhaled slowly, never taking her eyes off me. Then she said, just loud enough for the table to hear. Wait, you're... She stopped herself mid-sentence. Every conversation in the room died instantly, glasses froze halfway to mouths. The server halted mid-step. Even the background music seemed to fade. It felt like the entire room had taken one breath, and forgotten how to release it. And in that suspended moment, I realized something powerful. They still didn't know who I was, but one of them did. My father frowned, irritation finally bleeding through the polish. What is it? He asked. Sharper than he intended. The fiancée straightened in her chair. Not dramatic. Not triumphant. Just certain. Lauren Hayes, she said clearly. You're the founder, aren't you? No one spoke. The room didn't rush to fill the silence this time. It froze around it. That I met her gaze and gave the smallest nod. Nothing more. I didn't need to say it out loud, and my brother made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. Founder of what? She didn't answer him. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone with practiced ease. The motion of someone used to verifying information, not performing it. Few taps. Then she turned the screen around and placed it gently in the center of the table. An article, industry-focused. No glossy photos. No buzzwords for mass appeal. Just analysis, metrics, growth curves, and investor commentary. The headline referenced one of the most closely watched platforms in the sector right now. Praised a quiet launch, strong early traction, international reach. There was a paragraph dedicated to a founder who deliberately stayed out of the spotlight, allowing results to speak first. My name appeared once. No embellishment. No personal story. Just outcomes. The phone sat there like physical gravity. My father leaned forward, squinting, as if proximity could help him deny what he was reading. My mother's smile disappeared completely. Not faded. Vanished. The fiancée spoke again, her tone professional, almost impressed. "We've been trying to get a meeting for months. No press. No interviews. Just results." My brother shook his head. "That's not." He stopped when no one reacted. She turned to him. "You said you wanted me to meet visionaries." I didn't expect one to be sitting across from me. Something in the room cracked, not loudly, but thoroughly. No one moved. My mother's hand slid off my shoulder like it had burned her. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing came out. My father straightened slowly, color draining from his face. "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't answer right away. I picked up my glass, took a small sip, set it down carefully, deliberately, exactly where it had been. Then I said calmly, evenly, "You never asked." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. My brother stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "This is ridiculous," he said, voice rising. "If this were true, we would have known." The fiancée's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to him. "The whole point," she said, "was that you didn't." Something in his expression shifted, not anger, fear. The kind that comes when the hierarchy you've lived inside collapses without warning. The restaurant noise slowly crept back in. Cutlery, laughter, distant conversation. But our table remained isolated, like a glass box people were beginning to stare into it. I felt oddly calm. Clear. "I didn't hide it to prove anything," I said. "I hid it because I didn't need approval." My father swallowed hard, and my mother stared at the tablecloth, fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. I stood, smoothed my napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate. Ceremonial final. "I should go." I turned to the fiancée. "It was nice to meet you." She nodded, respect unmistakable in her expression. I didn't look at my family again. I walked out of the private room. The silence followed me. But not the familiar one. Not the silence of dismissal. Not the silence of being overlooked. This one was heavy, uncomfortable. Earned behind me, no one spoke. And for the first time in my life, that silence felt like justice. I didn't rush out of the restaurant. I walked at the same steady pace I always did, past the host's stand, past the bar, past the low hum of conversations that had nothing to do with me. When I stepped outside, the night air was cooler than I expected, brushing against my skin like a reset I hadn't known I needed. I walked a full block before stopping. My phone buzzed once in my hand. I didn't look. For years, I'd imagined this moment ending differently. Voices raised, apologies spilling out, tears, some dramatic acknowledgement that would finally make everything make sense. Instead, it ended with nothing. No chase. No confrontation. No last words. And somehow that was heavier. The silence held. There were no family group messages pretending nothing had happened. No carefully worded texts smoothing the edges. Just absence. Clean, uninterrupted. Few days later, my mother finally called. Her voice was unsteady, like she was walking on unfamiliar ground. The questions she asked weren't curious. They were searching. Attempts to regain footing. To restore the version of reality she understood. I answered politely. Briefly, that I didn't fill the gaps for her anymore, and why brother never reached out. I heard through someone else that the dinner had become awkward in retellings. Details softened. Emphasis shifted. The story edited just enough to protect pride. I let it be rewritten. I didn't need credit. I needed distance. What surprised me most was how light everything felt. I hadn't realized how much weight I'd been carrying. How much energy went into bracing myself, into translating my life into something they might accept. Without that constant pressure, things felt quieter inside. Work continued as it always had. Goals, decisions, progress. Nothing changed there. What changed was me. The constant need to prove myself faded. The urge to explain every choice disappeared. I finally understood something I hadn't before. Resolution doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Knowing where you end, and where other people's opinions begin. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost the version of myself that kept shrinking to fit. And I didn't miss her at all. I used to believe that being accepted by them would make me whole. That earning a seat at their table would finally settle something inside me. Now I know better. Understanding myself mattered more. That night didn't change who I was. It revealed it. And if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to see you best, you're not alone. Share where you're listening from. Tell me what helped you stand your ground. And subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.